Bien, continuamos con la intervención de Robert Adam. Robert Adam es un arquitecto que ha trabajado muchísimo tanto en proyectos de arquitectura como en proyectos de urbanismo y es también el presidente de INBAU en el Reino Unido. If you want, you have the pointer.
No, I don't. Well, leave it there just in case I need it.
For
Okay.
the slides,
Okay.
do you want me to?
No, I'll do it. I'll do it. Okay, hello. Hola. I'm very proud and pleased to be here, and I'm particularly pleased to have followed all the previous speakers. And of particular interest to me is to coming immediately after Juan Moya and Sarah Labon, because I think what I'm going to be saying is going to be following on from what they said, but in a much slightly different perspective. The beginning of this is a quote from Cicero, in case you didn't know. Now, I start off with this diagram. I'll explain this diagram. It's the last diagram I'm going to show, the first and the last. This is taken from the American philosopher William James, who, unlike all other philosophers before him, decided that the present was not just an infinitesimal moment between the past and the future, but the present was a specious present, is what he called it, and he believed it lasted about 12 seconds. It's like you could listen to a piece of music and you have to remember the last few notes and you have to anticipate the next note to understand the melody. I find this quite useful. I've expanded the idea because it sort of explains our relationship with the past and the future. Now, I shall just briefly talk about the future because if we're making places, the fact is we are making them for the future. This is unavoidable. You're making something new, or you're adapting something, but you're doing it for the future. Of course, modernist philosophers make a great deal of this. They say, Danny Libeskind constantly says he's making the future. Well, this is a boring fact, but he makes a great deal of it. But we're not really very good at the future. Here are a few future projections. This is in 1900 what they thought New York would look like on the top left. And on the bottom is a still from the new Blade Runner film, which just looks like Dubai with rain. The top is particularly good. This was the House of the Future from 1956. And this is what was supposed to be like in 1981. We had a lucky escape, I think, particularly with the clothing. And of course, they couldn't really get it right because the wife is still doing the cooking and the husband is still reading the newspaper. Because we're inevitably locked into the present. And at the bottom is a Star Trek city called Komar. It's supposed to be set in the year 2376, which looked faintly familiar. But the Kumaris apparently were a race of technophobes with no interest in the arts. Well, okay, I think they got that right. So, we're not really very good at the future because the only thing we know about the future for sure is we don't really know what it is. We know a little bit in the short term. In fact, the past is what we have, is all that we have. If we actually take the present literally as a moment, all we have is the past. And our past is our memory of the past. And that's how we deal with the past. There's nothing else. That's it. And memory, of course, and memory and place are intimately connected. Here are two responses to the Second World War. One is the old market town place in Warsaw, where they realized that the memory was of such great importance that they actually reconstructed it from being virtually totally destroyed. It is not, in fact, absolutely identical, but they reconstructed it so the memory was clear. And this is very important because of the destruction that had taken place. For some reason in Britain we didn't take this view. The one on the bottom was in Plymouth, which was destroyed, and we decided the memory was not important and created a terrible place. where the only memory now is a sort of horror of just what a terrible place it is. It's been there long enough to have its own memory, but unfortunately that memory is not a pleasant one. But we're very used to the idea of memory and creating places for memory. Here is the Peninsular War Monument from Porto, which I particularly like because it's a lion destroying a chicken or a rooster, a chicken representing France, of course. And, but that was done in 1909 specifically to commemorate that. And the other is the Altare della Patria, or the Vittorio Emanuele monument in Rome, to effectively to say, excuse my English, sod you to the Pope, and it actually was made a very prominent position in Rome. So the state and organs of the state make monuments and memorials. I've just discovered that our English word for memorial does not necessarily apply to death or to, but actually is more wide use. So memorial in Spanish has a slightly wider meaning in an English context. And of course we're used to the idea of memorials and places. As a Plaza de la Revolución in Havana, and so they're actually creating of a place in order to cement a particular memory of the state is familiar stuff. At the bottom we have Trafalgar Square, which is Trafalgar, which also makes the connection between the Iberian Peninsula, Spain, Britain and France. Of course, France on the negative one again, but then I'm British. And we're still used to this. These are recent memorializations, and in fact, specifically memorializations in both senses of the word. And one is just a competition that's just been won in London for a Holocaust memorial. I mean, the interesting thing is we keep producing Holocaust memorials. This is a new one. In Britain, where, of course, there was no Holocaust. And in order for it to justify it, they've had to say it's not just about the Holocaust and the war, it's about every subsequent similar event. So nonetheless, the idea of memorialization, of actually establishing memory with buildings and places, it continues even in all forms of architecture. The other one is the Palestinian Museum, which is a very strong political statement. That is to say, it's to specifically the Nakba, the disaster, which the creation of Israel. And actually, the museum was empty for some time and then was filled up. So that museum has a very, very specific political message, as indeed many museums do. So this idea that place and memory belong together is quite familiar. It's what we deal with on an everyday basis. Now I want to talk about certain aspects of it, because memory, as we deal with it, has different sides to it. And and then I'm going to deal with the issue of place and making place. Here's two examples about geography. One of the aspects of memory is, if you like, physical memory, things that are left by the past that act, if you like, as physical memory. Now here is geography. Now Rio de Janeiro, whatever it does, it really can't actually avoid its geography. It's a very powerful part of the place. Whereas Lago de Chalco outside Mexico City, it just moves into the lake. You know, it just basically just completely ignores the geography. But I believe geography is extremely important. It's the starting point of memory. And in the end, what we want to do is we want to belong to the place. We want to actually feel an identity with a place. And the first part of that identity is what geography has left us, what the last thousands or millions of years have left us. And in fact, in an aspect of sustainability, managing and using the existing geography must be the correct thing to do. And most towns and cities, for example, are by the sea or at river crossings or at major crossroads for geographic reasons. And that's just the way it is. And I think to ignore that or not to respond to that is foolish, is not sustainable, and it removes a place from its geographic origins, where it should be. And certainly I'm going to give some examples now, when we undertake master planning, the first thing we do is to employ landscape architects and geographers to come up with an analysis of the geography of the place. And the results are sometimes interesting. So I'll just give one or two examples of this. This is a sort of urban extension we were involved with outside a town in the south of England called Aylesbury. Doesn't really matter. And the top one shows that, in a way, why the town is there, because it sits in the midst, in a plain in between these ridges. But the bottom diagram is the important one, because that was the local geography. Now, our client came to us saying, we'd like to put this urban extension over all of this, like it was on a plan. But when we looked at the geography, when we actually examined the geography, this was clearly the wrong thing to do, is that there was a plain, there was actually an historic village on one side, and there was a slight rise on the other, and these were the places in which to create effectively two local centres, one of which was an historic centre which has sort of disappeared, which we restored, and the other was to create a new centre. Now, we simply wouldn't have done that unless we'd had this detailed geographic analysis, and certainly our client didn't want us to do that, but we persuaded them that the geography of the place was one of the things that really mattered. And there is the result, the master plan and some of the images. This one is still locked in the British governmental analysis system and has been for the last 5 years. But it was a good illustration. Another one was a village outside Dover, in the south of England, the port of Dover, and the south of England, which made the mistake of voting for the wrong political party, and so they decided it should have 6,000 new homes around it. Again, here, this is apparently, on a simple level, is relatively level land. There's no steep geography here at all. But when we started to look at it in more detail, actually what it consisted of was a series of low valleys and ridges running in this sort of southeast, northwest direction, southwest-northeast direction. And also, the other thing is that unless you're building in a desert, all landscape people have left their mark on it in some way. There's always some civilizing aspect to it. And I regard these as a great benefit. These are things, you're searching for character and identity all the time, and anything that is there is a benefit. It can be used as a benefit. Sometimes you have to destroy things to make a benefit, but it can be used as a benefit. So this basic geographic analysis informed the master plan that we produced. And here we have it, the ridges identified as landscape. And as you can see, as you move on to the master plan, that basic landscape grid is applied to the master plan. Interestingly, and I follow this from what Leo was saying, one of our problems with this was that we had an existing village which felt very strongly about its own identity. Actually, it was quite a new village. So what, in fact, we did was we created 3 more villages around the village and created local centres, because really the scale of this was just too big. And the other thing that happened with that was it enabled us to phase the development in a satisfactory way. So you would do one before you did the next, before you did the next. These things take a long time. This would take at least 20 years to build out, at least 20 years. But the geography was the thing that informed this. And then when we go down to the smaller scale, this is a small part of it. In fact, I think I put a square around it on the bottom right. You can see that when we actually started to go into more detail, that same basic geographic form is followed through, a series of ridges and valleys. So that's one form of memory. That's a physical memory that's just delivered to us by any place that we go. It has a physical memory, and sometimes it's a memory of human intervention. But the other thing about memory is memory in society. I deliberately chose Spanish examples here, is that one isn't Spanish, one is from South America. But effectively, there are things that we do in an everyday way, and sometimes they're ceremonies. They're like the Fallas de San Jose in Valencia, or the Moros y Cristianos in Alicante. These are things that happen in specific places, and they continue, and they change, and they happen. And these are the traditions, the things that give us our identity. And there's a whole series of them. I chose the easy things. The Quince Añaras is specific to South American and Central American countries, and has gone into Latin populations in the United States. But these little everyday family ceremonies, they are what make us what we are, and they're very individual and they're very particular. Our culture and our identity is made up of our collective memory, the memories that we share. And in fact, the theory of collective memory also is that collective memory of the community also structures the way that you form new memories. Very, very important. And in effect, that is tradition. Tradition is to a significant extent the same as collective memory. The power of tradition is interesting. I mean, I could give a whole talk on this, but don't have time. But you can make them up. The Festa della Tomatina in Buñuel is actually only started in 1945. So you keep going long enough, and people believe it's always been there. My favorite is the European Court of Human Rights, which came into existence in 1959. But in order to give themselves authority, they had to wear the robes of 17th century clerics, because that's what judges do. So somebody actually had to design these and make them up. Actually, they're French, which is particularly offensive to me, robes, but someone had to make up robes of authority, because these traditions give us authority. It gives us something. And this is the very important aspect of memory when it comes to design. And I mean, in our previous presentations, we heard this in specific cases, and I'm really just following on from that in a broader sense. And to deal with a couple of particular projects in relation to this, one is a barracks. As armies get smaller, they release their barracks, and these barracks are then developed, much as containerization has resulted in port development. And the barracks has a particular set of memories. This is Aldershot Barracks, and the memories are all there. You know, this was actually created. The memories are also the history of the place. The other thing we do is to look at how a place is developed, because we're just the next chapter in a story that's being written. So this memory of the military memory is very important. And it comes to, I keep meeting people who were born in this hospital. There are families are buried in these places. The bottom right is where the IRA blew up a bomb. And the top right is where a man died rescuing a horse in 1890. So this is full of memories. And the other issue is, well, whose memories are they? This is an interesting debate. They're national memories, because it's the memory of an army which was national, and people keep coming to me with this. It's the memory of the surrounding area, or the memory of the town. And it's also the memory of the new people that come into it. So when we produce the master plan, what we've done here is we've kept, if you like, the fabric, the gridded fabric. Grids are relatively unusual in British planning, these orthogonal grids. But we've kept the memory of that grid. Now, people will come in and make their own memories out of this, but we've had to deal very specifically in a very complex way with the memories of what was there, and creating something for people to have new memories, and this is what we're doing. Finally, this is another much smaller project which we did in the west of England, which is right next to a very important, very ancient village called Norton St. Philip. Now, the other thing about memory, you can talk about the big memory, the graveyards, the ceremonies, but actually a lot of it is the memory of small things, and we heard some of this earlier on today. Texture, detail, materials, very easily ignored. And here we have some of the texture, material, and details of the adjacent villages. Things like People who live there understand perfectly that the stone that they've got out of the ground is particular to their area. And sometimes it changes within a very short distance. So these things, people often don't articulate them. But of course, as designers, it's our job to articulate these memories. It's our job to understand what people's memories are and try and work with them. But it's very easy to forget the small things, because this small texture of memory is what gives places identity. And I think my time is now up, as I had my 3-minute sign a moment ago. And my final image is what we did, in effect. This is part of that extension to that village, where we worked very hard to use the same stone, the same materials, and the same details. It doesn't mean that you have to do exactly the same thing. Of course not. It's like the traditions that are made up. They're only made up when they're convincing. They're only made up when people can believe them. And so that's what we do as designers. We're actually writing the next chapter of the book, and someone's going to write a chapter after us. But what's very important is that the chapter we're writing makes sense from the previous chapters. And those previous chapters are the memory. And as I say, memory is all we have. There is nothing else. Thank you very much.